Welcome to Being Intrepid, where we share practical insights from leaders who are shaping the future of learning and work. I'm your host, Sam Herring. Over the past 2 decades, I've built companies to help people learn and organizations grow. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by my friend, Raj Ramachandran. Raj has built a career across consulting, learning, technology, and change management. Over the last decade, he's focused his career on leadership and executive coaching at firms like Korn Ferry, Heidrick and Struggles, and now at WittKieffer. WittKieffer is a global executive search and leadership advisory firm that works with senior leaders in healthcare, education, life sciences, and other mission-driven organizations. Raj, welcome to Being Intrepid. It's great to have you with me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's great to be here. I've really enjoyed, this podcast and how it explores, learning not just as content, but something that shapes how people, act and show up. I think it's just super cool that you're doing this kind of work. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, really, Raj, we've known each other for many years and have been friends for I count you as a friend, and I'm really excited to have you on for this conversation.
Yeah,
Um,
decades.
decades, exactly. Yeah. Uh, so Raj, I'd love to get personal on this a little bit as a leadership coach, because you're obviously getting personal with some senior executives. So,
Yeah.
as a leader, can you tell us about a time, perhaps earlier in your career, a lesson you learned from maybe another leader that shapes how you think about and execute and live as a leader today?
Yeah, I mean, it's a powerful question. I think it's a tough question to answer with just one. I actually may give you two examples if you don't
Okay,
mind.
perfect. Love it.
So I'll kind of go with the first one. It's probably an earlier influence of mine. It actually came from one of my UPenn professors.
Okay.
Brilliant, intimidatingly smart, but also just deeply thoughtful. I guess growing up, I was been told that there's no such thing as a dumb question. And he basically made me realize it's a little more nuanced of a truth. He basically said it's not that questions are dumb or smart, it's just that some questions are better than others. And better questions kind of lead to better thinking and better
Mm,
dialogue and
mm,
just better
mm.
outcomes. So I think the lesson has stuck with me in terms of,
Okay.
asking better questions and helping my clients and the people I coached ask better questions. So that was one
Mm,
that really stuck.
mm.
Another one came, Sam, when this is a little later in my career, and it was a senior partner who mentioned this to me when I felt stuck. I had always believed that I'm nice and that being nice is important. I work hard and trying to be agreeable, and that would lead to good things. And what I realized is that I kept hitting kind of a wall. There's a ceiling that kind of
Mm.
kept showing up, and invisible or visible. And he helped me understand that there's this difference between nice and being kind. And I
Okay.
think we often
Yeah.
confuse that. So nice
Yeah.
is, sometimes avoiding discomfort, while
Yeah.
kindness is actually being honest, direct, and sometimes challenging. Right. That
Hmm.
distinction kind of unlocked my own development, but I use that funnily with how I coach executives because I think they can get confused on, being too nice or being confused by nice and kind. And I
Yeah.
think it unlocks some of that. So that to me was a real leadership lesson,
Yeah.
and how to have courage and being, truly kind.
Yeah. That nice can be go along, get along, can be associated with avoidance behaviors, which is an absolute death trap for leaders. So,
Exactly.
um, so awesome. Thank you for sharing your personal growth there and lessons learned, Raj, as a leader. So, for listeners who are less familiar with WittKieffer, can you just briefly describe the kinds of clients that the firm serves, and tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about the advisory services you provide for a focus on leadership?
Okay. I mean, you kind of mentioned some of that in the intro. I guess, we are a global executive search and advisory firm, but I
Hmm.
tend to describe this as more, working in those mission critical spaces, right? So
Yeah.
we're heavily in healthcare, academic medicine, education, life sciences. I guess places where I could argue leadership decisions have real human consequence.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think, helping, leaders, we not only help place them. So when you think about executive search, a lot of that is placing these leaders. But,
Hmm.
me and my team in advisory, we want to make sure that they're supportive in role, right? So it's not I always joke that the placement is not the end, it's the beginning, right?
Hmm.
So like the idea that you support
Yeah.
them in that role, and then it's kind of supporting their teams and their teams grow as leaders, right? So the real
Yeah.
work begins once you place him in that role. That's kind of the intersection of the work that we do. So it's a combination of assessment, it's kind of coaching, it's development, succession, all those things kind of line up in the space that we do in advisory. But it really is that big differentiation of placement is actually not the end, it's the beginning.
Yeah. Healthcare, where you focus, I mean, certainly an incredibly turbulent market, lots of change from the regulatory perspective, from a cost perspective, bearing down on these organizations. And like you said, it's like it's hard to think of a more mission-driven organization than healthcare. As you work across the multiple clients, what are you seeing as the recurring business challenges that leaders are wrestling with today?
So really, there's challenges in healthcare. I didn't notice. I didn't notice. No, I actually think, Sam, the theme is remarkably consistent. I mean, leaders are having to deal with doing more with less, right? I mean, that is kind of
Hmm.
that consistent kind of thought. You know, you have to. There's that sustained financial pressure. There's that workforce, exhaustion going on. There's more
Yep.
complexity. All these rising expectations. I mean, this problem of the challenges in healthcare. I think the bigger change that's really, I think, ironically, healthcare is slower moving to this is that technology adoption, and
Yep.
the implications of AI and these tools. Because a lot of the technology you think in healthcare is usually front office, as in like
Yep.
you think robotics and you think, drug medication, that kind of stuff. The back office of healthcare hasn't caught up to that yet. So you're going to see a
Hmm.
lot
Hmm.
more of that penetration with how the supply chain and all the implications around, AI infiltrating the back office of healthcare.
Right.
That's
Right.
going to be, that's a huge opportunity and challenge and need as we see progression.
Okay. And those business challenges you mentioned, which I'm sure everyone can relate to, who's got some exposure to healthcare, which is everyone. Uh, how do those show up as leadership challenges for these new senior executives that the firm has placed and that you start working with?
Um, So this one, I guess the way I would say it is at that senior level, I think the challenge really shifts from like solving problems to holding
Yeah.
complexity, right? And there's I think it was F. Scott Fitzgerald, that expression, the test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposing thoughts at the
Mm.
same time and still remain functional, right?
Yes.
So I think leaders at this level have to do a lot more of that yes and thinking versus either
Hmm.
or. Because you think, as you kind of propel up, it's a lot of binary, right? It's a lot of like do this, don't do this, do this. But when you get to the senior levels, you have to be able to hold those opposing views and deal with all that complexity.
Yeah.
That's the real kind of shift that I find them having to go through. And I think the other thing, Sam, what often surprises leaders at this level is how isolating it is.
Hmm.
They're not that many. Last time I checked, there are only 500 Fortune 500 CEOs, right? I mean, the number is
Hmm.
really small
Hmm.
when you
Hmm.
think about what happens at these organizations when you get to the senior levels, and they can't easily say, "I don't know," right? And yet
Yeah.
they're expected to project that confidence, even when the path isn't clear. So they have to hold that tension every day that, they may not have the answer and people expect them to, and then how do they get that support? Which is why the work that we do becomes really critical, I think,
Yeah.
that really
Yeah.
matters, from
Yeah.
what I see.
Yeah, I mean, and the trick with being able to say I don't know to the kinds of challenges you describe when we're talking about novel challenges, especially, that is the right answer, and it can build trust too with the team when you're authentic and say, yeah, I don't know, like let's solve this together.
Yeah, well,
W-
there's a thought, it's so the thing I kind of say is there's two parts to that. It's I don't know, and what do you think?
yes,
Right. So that
yes,
immediately adding that second part, what do you think, and inviting your team in,
yeah,
wow, that unlocks so much because just getting the discussion around what do you think is
yeah.
powerful.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, invites their participation, their buy-in, and pretty sure you're gonna get better results than, just you thinking you're the sage.
True. True.
Um, so what have you found? I'm just curious with leaders who are particularly those who are stepping into this new role, whether that's a CEO or chief medical officer, what have you. They're just stepping into this role. Where do they trip up the most? Like what do you see as common patterns for
Ooh.
them that like worked for them before, but not working for them and when they're in the
So when they make that inflection
yeah,
point, it
yeah,
kind of goes to the point I just made around, like they've been taught to know all the answers and then
yeah,
that kind of shifts or pivots. But I think,
yeah,
in the executive coaching work that, my team and I do, I think there's that thought that it's about skill building, and it really
yeah,
is more about sense making, right? So there's
Mhm.
that shift from like I'm here to develop skills and know these things versus I got to make sense of what's going on. So these leaders
Mhm.
are already highly capable, right? What they
Right.
need is
Right.
that time to reflect, to see those
Right.
patterns, to understand, how to manage that. You're helping them make that identity shift from that expert, to the enterprise leader, which
Yeah.
is much more about influencing than pure authority, right? They got to
Yeah.
move into that idea that I'm not just because I have the hierarchy of or the title, that doesn't mean that I'm the one that has to quote unquote do it all. They have to be able to,
Yeah.
create that space for more influence and more of that dialogue. That's
Yeah.
hard for them to do because they literally have been told, especially physician leaders,
Totally.
they rule the OR, right?
Yeah.
They're the people in the operating room, and then you're asking them to kind of influence people that they don't have direct control over. That's a huge opportunity and a need.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking of Satya Nadella's, phrase of he wants to shift has worked at Microsoft to shift the culture from the know-it-all to the learn-it-all
Heard it all.
and being curious, and
I use that
working
all
with
the
the
time. I was actually just at a board retreat early this week, and I quoted Microsoft. I quoted Satya Nadella with that exact point because it was such a powerful thought to be curious, right? Be
yeah,
curious and ask those questions because you don't know it all. And especially these days, there's so much, outside influence. You have to go outside.
yeah, 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 yeah. So you work with teams of leaders as well, and so maybe kind of pivoting down to that senior team because those are senior folks
Yep.
as well. A lot of the leadership development programs, like you just said, are about learning, discrete skills. My listening skills, my feedback skills, my coaching
Yep.
skills, right?
Yep.
That's kind of emblematic of your frontline programs, your mid-level. As you're working on developing more senior leaders, and you just got to this in terms of the sense making and so on, but
Yep.
could you unpack a little bit about what's different maybe in terms of developing those leaders, could be coaching, could be training at those more executive levels?
Sam, you know what I am learning and seeing. I used to think, and I remember when you and I first talked about this in the learning world, it was all about the content,
Yeah.
right? Content is king. I remember that was the expression that we used to use. I'm now realizing, especially at the senior levels, if content is king, air quotes, context is the universe,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
context is everything when it comes to senior leadership. So that's why you can't just cookie cutter and
Yep.
say, because I mean, right now all that content is available for free, right? You can go to
Right.
YouTube and you
Right.
can see whatever you want to is all out there. So that
Yep.
doesn't separate me at all, right?
Yep.
It's this idea of like how well do you know the context, and that's where I could argue technology's getting better at that, right? When we think
Yep.
about what Copilot and all these other tools that we're using, it may know our organization better if we have the walled gardens or whatnot. But like creating that context space is
Yep.
really key. And what I'm working on, you'll appreciate this. So there's two ways when I'm working with senior teams that I think is unique. One is they're still personal, right? So there's this idea of like a lot of that work I draw from. I love Stoic philosophy, so I actually
Hmm.
teach Stoicism to these
Hmm.
executives. And the first
Hmm.
reaction is, "We're learning what?" Okay, and I say, "Well, no. There's actually a very practical, point to this." And there's this simple framing. It's called E plus R equals O. So E stands for event, R stands for reaction, and O stands for outcome. And then I
Okay.
teach leaders that, the leaders can't control the event and they can't control the outcome. The only thing they
Yep.
can really have control over is reaction,
Yep.
right? So what they have to do is develop that pause behind, between the event and the outcome. And that's that form of maturity at that personal level. So it's that difference between being reactive and being responsive. And when
Right.
leaders kind of model that kind of discipline, it cascades to the organization, right? So just pausing,
Yep.
asking, Hmm, good idea. What do you think? Right? Right. Just that moment to pause opens up the dialogue. That's what I see at that kind of individual level at the senior team. And then if you
Y-
ask me at the group level, we
Yeah.
use I know there's every consultant firm has their models and frameworks and whatnot, but there's one that we developed that I think has been pretty powerful. We call it lift leadership, lift lenses of leadership. And I almost
Hmm.
think of it like a compass, north, south, east, west. And the
Hmm.
North is all about visionary leadership, right? What are those things
Okay.
that you do to look out and
Okay.
think about vision? The South
Yep.
is all about operational leadership. How do you
Okay.
execute and deliver? And then West is all about that idea of relationships. How do you connect with others? And
Yep.
East is how do you actually become more self-aware?
Oh,
So it's a
okay.
combination of, telescope, microscope, stethoscope, and interscope. So those are the four lenses that we use. And then we've got, obviously content and models and things all underneath it. But using that as a framing, I can diagnose, diagnosis, kind of see where you're at. where are those gaps as an individual or team, and then we work with you to kind of navigate all those things. And obviously, could you imagine what the hardest lens is of those four? Do you want to guess which
I
lens
was
you?
going to ask you that,
Yeah.
but my guess is self-awareness. Is that right?
Yeah,
Okay.
why? So why do you think self-awareness is so difficult?
Well, I mean, I think it's, it touches, it touches some perhaps some deep ruts in our psyche. The ways that we're shaped, our family of origin, some very deeply trodden paths there. And it's also for your audience of medical professionals, medical leaders, they're actually taught explicitly not to show up with that, to distance themselves from the patient. You could tell I
Right.
grew up in a
No,
medical household.
no, but it's I mean it's exactly right because I mean ultimately, and this is not to get into a psychology class or whatever, but it's
Yeah,
ego,
yeah,
right? I mean because
yeah,
we've tied our identity to all this work that we do. You even asked me at the beginning, what do you do? What's your title? Where do you work?
yeah,
Then I could tell you, Sam, it's not about my title. It's not about where I
yeah.
work. It's not, and you're like, well, what's your value, right? So you can go into that whole thing. But if I can help you with
Yeah,
self-awareness and help you understand that if you can, look at it objectively, then
yeah,
it really opens up that that aperture for this kind of work. And I think that's the golden kind of thought of that compass is that if you can build off of self-awareness, my gosh, your vision gets clear, your ability to execute gets clear, the way you connect to others get clear. So that's why I think we really found a way to kind of make that happen is through that kind of framing.
yeah, yeah. And this reminds me, one of the podcasts I did last year was with an organization called Onsite
Mm.
that has a therapeutic model, for
Mm.
leader development. So they go there. They go deeply into family of origin scenarios, and so it goes they go quite deeply into the
Yeah.
self-awareness, which is fascinating, and I think
Yeah.
is underlying a lot of behaviors that all of us have. Of course,
Yeah.
that's how we're
Well,
shaped. So
and as you say that, it's interesting. Not that we want to put them on a couch, right, and kind of put them through
yeah, yeah,
the psychometric part, but it is. And I didn't say this earlier, but when we do the physician leadership specifically, we do this in a dyad approach. So it's
yeah,
we've got a
yeah,
leadership coach and a physician mentor. We actually have physicians on staff, and
yeah,
we co-coach or do these programs, and that is so revealing because what happens is I'm not saying that they don't necessarily listen to me, but when you have a doctor with you, the conversation changes, right? So me and
yeah,
Dr. Anderson, for example, we will
yeah,
go in, have this dialogue with a new chief medical officer, of a system or whatever the case may be,
yeah,
and we'll get to know them in that capacity. I'll get into some of that stuff, and
yeah,
Mike would ask them very separately or specifically on how they think about implication, like why are they going to medicine, and what are they trying to what happened as they went through med school, because those are traumatic experiences, right, in its own right.
sure.
So all those things kind of add up to this idea of creating greater self-awareness, and I think that really is important as they progress in their career.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it could become a real superpower for a leader that has that. So let's jump the shark to current. We talked a bit about AI and
Mm.
technology and how it's changing things in the back office.
Mm.
I would love to hear your
Mm.
perspective on how are organizations experimenting with AI coaches,
Yeah.
and not to replace the executive coach, but what are the complements? How can it be democratizing access? I just love to hear your perspective on where do you see promise? Where do you see peril? Where is
Sam,
this crazy field going, Raj?
this is it's just we're in the wild wild west, right? I mean, all I can
Yeah,
tell you is right now there's just so much there's promise, but there's also chaos, right, as
yeah,
you say. And I think the promise is in that AI enabled coaching, right? It can scale access, it can surface patterns, it can give you those timely prompts that I think is really important. But I think the peril is confusing, basically confusing that data and thinking it's providing wisdom, right?
right,
And that's
right,
that
right.
context piece that at least for today, right now, it hasn't gotten that context as well. I think
Yeah,
it could get better the more we feed the darn thing, but
yeah,
I don't think it can replace trust and accountability and moral judgment. I
yeah,
think that's the danger, is thinking that because something is personalized and data driven, that it's sufficient. We
yeah,
just have to be really careful. So I'll give you an example. There's executives that I'm working with that are using AI to run like these after action reviews. So they have a meeting, they do
Mm,
like an after action review. Like I was just,
yeah,
at a session with a big board, and we talked about kind of lessons learned, and you're capturing, what actually happened. So you can use AI to kind of, it takes the notes and,
sure.
all that transcription. And it can help you kind of, what did you do well? What could you do better next time? It's kind of giving you some of that structured reflection
Hmm.
that you don't
Hmm.
necessarily have time for. So using the
Hmm.
technology, I don't know how you do it, but when you take all these recordings, how often are you going back and actually looking at the recordings? Do you guys, when I'm sure you're in a ton of meetings, do you go back and look at those transcripts and kind of process them? What do you do with the, after you do those recordings? What happens to them?
I mean, it depends. If it's an important meeting where, I really want to leverage that, then I'll read it closely and find errors often or find, really missed points, so it's an input. It's like a decent scribe, but it's not gospel, that's for sure.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I've seen, us doing, and even with my clients, I'm like, okay, you take that transcript. If there's, let's just say, 10 people on the call, and we all agree that it's missing things. But what I'll
Right.
say is, hey, let's do like when we do the one-on-one with one of my teammates or with the client, we will look at the transcript together and say
Uh-huh.
what is right and wrong. So just don't, because it's almost, if it's 10 people, it's too much. If it's one person, but you can use it as a learning tool after so take the transcript, have the conversation with a colleague. What did you see? Well, it said this. What did I see? And then that becomes one more way to kind of get more clarity
Right.
out of what's coming out of the data. So give it one more check is what I'm noticing as a way to work with that data.
Right. 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 Interesting. Um, any use cases within the healthcare sector that you see as promising for AI coaching, AI learning practice, that kind of thing?
Well, so you've probably seen there's a lot of coaching tools. I'm not going to name names, but like there's the ones that you could, like, if you think about it as if you're early in your career and you need coaching or advice, what ends up happening is a lot of these companies are using the platform, AI or coaching providers, right?
Yep.
And that
Yep.
has a lot of built-in AI, that they're using and having conversation. I think it's really powerful. I'm noticing if you get to the senior level, I don't know if this is why the case is, but they still feel like it's highly confidential information. They need people that have the expertise or perceived expertise that have this
Hmm.
background. They
Hmm.
still want to have that dialogue. And here's what I'm noticing: they still want to meet face to face. Okay, so the
Yeah.
irony of the whole thing is, you think, well, we can do it virtually over Zoom, and it's all good, right? But I would literally have to go, fly to their office, have that conversation, be in their office, and really have that discussion. I don't know if AI is going to have that same level of connectivity or trust yet, right? That may
Right.
change when, the robots come out from Tesla, but this exact
Right.
moment, we're still wanting that face-to-face dialogue in the senior level, so what I see it as, and I'm not going to have my, AI companion record stuff. I'm not, we don't do that, but I think the ability to kind of know that having AI technology as you kind of work in the organization is going to be useful, but the senior level, it's not being infused quite yet.
Right.
It may happen soon, but I think we still want it face to face.
Right. Right. And one of the things I've noticed too is in the kind of the challenges at the junior level is there's a certain scaffolding that you need in order to know that it's wrong, right? So if you're doing something for the
Right.
first time or you haven't done it enough and you're getting like very assertive, authoritative feedback from the coach, but you don't have the judgment or experience to know that where it's wrong or where it's
Right.
missing or where it's incomplete. Those are some of the things that I think we need to work on. Um,
Yeah.
Fascinating times.
Hold on. Let me build on that too,
Yeah,
though, because the other
yeah.
thing I'm realizing too, yeah, I've noticed this. So if you think of it as three levels, right? Just generically, you've got your early in career, mid career, and then senior leader.
Yeah.
When I noticed, working with early in career, they wanted a lot of prescription. They needed to
Hmm.
know, like,
Hmm.
task by task. It was almost like that operational lens was really key, right?
Yeah.
When you get to mid-career, a lot of that is the relational. That's that kind of, how do you build relationships, connecting. They want a lot more advice on, you could call it the communicating for effectiveness, all those things, that difficult conversations. There's a lot of that relational, importance. And at that senior level, that visionary piece becomes really pivotal important. And I
Yeah.
think the challenge with AI, you could have it create your 10-year plan, right? You can say, we're company X, give me a 10-year plan. But does it really, to your point about, does it really know the nuances and is it
Yeah.
asking the right
The
questions?
context, like
The
you said
context
before.
isn't there,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
that part is really, so
Yeah.
that's why I think
Yeah.
it falls apart a bit. If it's really prescriptive, it's
Yeah.
great. So I
Yeah.
think to
Yeah.
your point about like if they're
Yeah.
asking the right questions, that prescription is wonderful. But the senior level, it's not as prescriptive. I mean, you
Yeah.
really have to get in more nuance, and I don't think the technology is quite lived up to that.
Yeah, we are building all kinds of AI features into Intrepid, and with role play capabilities and AI coach, and I was on a webinar recently, and someone asked like, hey, well, why would I need an AI coach in an application like Intrepid? I can just do that in ChatGPT.
Yeah, yeah,
And my response was almost exactly what you just said. It's like, yeah, for generic kind of junior skills, I 100% agree with
yeah.
you. You do not need, that to be, built into another platform. But what you can do with Intrepid is you have the context of being able to use RAG models to query your data,
Mm,
your repositories, your knowledge bases, and the whole overall cohort learning experience. So you're bringing context essentially. So I think that's a really
absolutely
keen thing that we're experimenting with and working with our customers on. So
fascinating. Huh.
yeah.
More
So
to come.
Raj, kind of pulling this to
Yeah,
to a close.
sure.
I mean, you've had an incredible career. You've worked with some amazing organizations over the years, and you're both a student of leadership and a practitioner and a guide and a counselor. So working with thousands of executives. So I'd love to have you distill your wisdom. But what would you say is the most important thing for your advice to those who are also developing leaders in their organization? What should they focus on?
I can only pick one thing, Sam. You're making this
Eh,
about one thing. Come on, give me a little
top
more
thing.
latitude. The top thing.
Your
I,
top
I, I
top thing.
can I mean, so, and again, I don't know if this just sounds trite or whatnot, but I think, especially with senior leaders, I could argue we're all challenged with all the, distractions that we're having, but just creating protected time to have honest reflection is
Mhm.
so pivotal, right? Like, when's the last time we're actually, taking the time to reflect on what I learned today?
Yeah.
That is such a powerful thing. I can give you a really interesting example. I was working with this one senior executive, new first time CEO, got thrust in the role, dealing with the board, dealing with all the challenges with the organization. They're going through all the challenges of, staff changes, whatever else. And I had him, I asked him something. I go, when's the last time you had uninterrupted time? He's laughing at me. He goes, what do you mean uninterrupted time? And I go, when have you had time for you? And he goes,
Yeah.
I don't know what you're talking about. So we actually, in his calendar, we created this little code, TFAL, think for a living, right? And
Mhm.
it's
Mhm.
block time. It's 30-minute chunks. We started as a 30-minute on a Friday and eventually expanded to like 90 per week. But you can't schedule over that time. That's kind of
Right.
part one, right?
Right.
But guess what the problem becomes? So you put it on your calendar, you say no one else can be in there, but then what are you doing? I got to check email. And you revert
Uh-huh.
right back to what your
Uh-huh.
behavior is, right? So the second thing we had to
Right.
do was you have to create an intention for that time, right? So you block the time, but
Okay.
you're going to have an
Okay.
agenda for yourself, right? It says, this is what I'm going to be working on in this time period, right?
Right.
So you can't check email because you're working on that task item. Remember how, not to make this about a Microsoft thing, but I remember Bill Gates used to have think weeks. He used to go on
Hmm.
he'd take the entire week with his books
Hmm.
or papers or whatever, and he would just protect that time, wherever
Yep.
he was to kind of read and then use that as time. It's that kind of thought, right? That you
Yep.
have to give
Yep.
yourself that time. We say put the oxygen mask on yourself, but you have to give that TFAL time to yourself so that you can actually learn and think and have that processing time, but make sure you protect that time and you give
Yep.
yourself an agenda on what you can do that time. I think that is just such an important thing for senior leaders to do that and to make sure that they commit to themselves.
Love it. Love it. Well, thank you, Raj, for sharing your experience, your wisdom, working across many years of advising leaders and diving into healthcare a bit, which is super interesting. So, look, if listeners want to know more about your work or follow your thinking, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah, I mean, I know everyone has the same kind of thought. It's going to the website, WittKieffer.com or
Yep.
obviously LinkedIn,
Okay.
Raj Ramachandran at WittKieffer.com. I don't, I wish there was something a little more, less common, but that's kind of the best two ways that I have
Perfect.
right now to get a hold of me. But yeah, I'd love to, if there's any questions on this stuff or just as people out there kind of see things, I think it's just valuable what you're doing to kind of share, insights and knowledge with your constituents and your listeners. So thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. It's a real pleasure. So thanks, Raj. And to our listeners, if you found today's conversation valuable, please share it with at least one other person who you think would benefit. And please follow us follow Being Intrepid on Apple, Spotify, YouTube. That really helps us with discoverability and so on. So until next time, stay curious, chart your own course, and keep on learning. Thanks, Raj.
Thank you, Sam.